Je ziet oorlogs komen klippen uit van, was versteende bomen. Hulle is miljoenen jaren oud, zei die mensen.
The story of how hundreds of Boers emigrated to windswept Patagonia in Argentina in the early 1900s after the war with the English has fascinated South Africans. A 2015 documentary called The Boers at the End of the World explores how their descendants still speak an antiquated Afrikaans to this day. Now, a novel by Maya Fowler delves deeper into the story. Patagonia explores the importance of land, language and Afrikaner identity. How did you come across the story and why did you want to write about it?
Yeah, it is really fascinating and most unusual. When I was really little, my dad told me about a friend of his whose wife had been born in Argentina, and I couldn't believe it because she was this Afrikaans lady and Argentina was so far away. And my dad said yes, and she speaks Spanish and everything. So I just thought that was amazing. So it's tickled me ever since then. And then over the last several years, I've been researching it more actively. And eventually in 2014, I went to visit the community. So it just felt to me for a long time that this is a story I want to tell.
In terms of the research, you went to go and speak to the community, but just tell me more about how much time did you spend with them and the kind of things that they told you about?
Well, I wasn't able to spend all that much time with them because I had to pay out of my own pocket for all this research. Yeah, we just sat around chatting. I asked them plenty of questions. We got together in social settings. So the speech was all very natural and yeah, and they're such an easygoing lot and they were so happy to see this person from what they keep calling Africa that it was really easy to get along with them.
The landscape descriptions in your book, especially there in Argentina, are extremely vivid. Just talk to me about what it looks like there.
Well, it looks very similar to the Karoo, this part of Patagonia. And I should just add, Patagonia is a really big area with different landscapes within this region, right? But this part of Patagonia is similar to the Karoo, but even drier. Yeah, these windswept plains. This isn't, you know, the landscape, this is the weather, but it is the windiest place that I've ever been. So it's a very harsh landscape.
So in the book, you've got four main characters. You've got the one couple, Bastian and Salome, who are the couple from just after the war. And then you've got, in present day, you've got Tashius and Alta. But the two stories are parallel. So Bastian and Tashius are related. But it's interesting because both men do, you know, some horrible things. They refuse to take responsibility for what they've done. They are quite cowardly and then they flee to Argentina. And then these two women, Alta and Salome, they decide, hell no, this is not happening. We're going to make them pay.
For a very long time, I've been wanting to use the structure of a fugue in music as the basis for a novel. And then this was the perfect opportunity. The fugue, the way it works is that you have a short little piece of melody that is repeated. So and it's in multiple voices, right? So I knew that I needed to have four voices here. The first voice says the little part, which in this case is I have to get out of here. And then another voice answers that, and the answer in this book is not without me you don't. So you have the four voices doing this. Yeah, so it had to be four characters, it had to be a parallel structure, and it was really fun to work with that. For me, music is a big part of my daily life, and it was quite natural that it would spill over into my writing. But it was also a way of bringing all the characters together. Bastian and Alta aren't related except by marriage, but I wanted to have that thread through the whole thing. So Bastian plays a lot of folk tunes, and they're very famous folk tunes. If you're Afrikaans or you grew up Afrikaans, then you would know these. And that was one of the challenges when I translated the book. You can't assume that the English audience would know these tunes. So I had to find English substitutes, things that were similar, that would evoke something similar, or sometimes I just had to make something up.
This book comes at a very interesting time because right now there are a lot of conversations happening around Afrikaans and Afrikaner identity. And I mean, back then, just after the war between the Boers and the English, there were a lot of conversations about the Afrikaner identity and where to from here. And right now we've got the same thing. We're looking at the sort of, if I can call it, the toxic Afrikaner identity and where we've come from and the horrors of that identity, and now trying to forge a new one and deciding what that new identity is. I mean, was that something that played into your writing at all, some of the conversations that are happening right now?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the things is that I wanted to explore to what extent being an Afrikaner is tied to the land, right? Afrikaner comes from the name of our continent, and here I have them on a different continent, so are they still Afrikaners? And the short answer is that they certainly identify as Afrikaners. And it's pretty interesting because for them to identify as Afrikaners, it doesn't quite have that toxicity that is present here, because they left before 1948, before the rise of apartheid, right? But yeah, that was an interesting conversation. And something that I find interesting is this country is, yes, Afrikaner identity, and many people from outside or even other people in this country think maybe of Afrikaners as one group with one ideology, and of course that's never true of any group. So there are people who hark for the past, but then there are also very, very open-minded people. But yes, Tertius is a lecturer of history at Stellenbosch University, and that has been reported on widely in the news, that there's a controversy around language there, language of instruction. And so I was able to use that in the book. Tertius, while he speaks English well and understands English well, naturally, he does have a very strong accent. So people often mock him for that, and it makes him really, really uncomfortable. And it's one of the things that makes him think that he just doesn't fit in here anymore at all.
So the book is in English and Afrikaans. You're also a translator. So did you write in Afrikaans and then translate to English, or was somebody else involved in translating?
Yeah, this one I translated myself. And I wrote it in Afrikaans first because this is, it deals so very much with the language. So I wanted to get, especially the dialogue down in Afrikaans first. And but that was the very challenging part to translate. And a dialogue is usually tricky to translate, but in this case especially so because of the type of Afrikaans spoken there.
Yeah, and I mean that also feeds into my next question, because later in the book, once Tertius gets to Argentina and he gets to Patagonia and he finds one of his long-lost family members, the way that this man speaks is very distinctive. It's that old-fashioned Afrikaans that kind of stayed there through the years, that came from the 1900s. And stayed there. So it's this old-fashioned way. It's a very peculiar way of speaking. So how on earth do you then translate that into English and make sure that people get that same sense of they're speaking this old-fashioned Afrikaans with this probably strange intonation and accent, but then you have to try and bring that across in English?
Yeah, there are a few tricks you can use, but it was certainly very challenging. There are also certain things that happen in the past tense in the Afrikaans that deviate from standard Afrikaans in South Africa. So, for example, you would say in Afrikaans, if you want to say I was 14, like 14 years old, you would say ek was 14. But the way they say it there, ek was 14 gewees het. So to give a flavor of that, I had to sort of tinker with past tense in English, and my solution to that was to overgeneralize the past tense rule. So instead of like talked, and go, went, I would then use go, goed, which, you know, gives some indication of how that structure is different.
Thank you so much for chatting to me.
Thank you, Andrea. It's been a pleasure.